My parents' relationship worsened with every passing day, and there were so many things I could not understand. For example, where I was allegedly born was never clearly explained. The only explanation was that I was born. A few other lies have also been told to us children, including how a stork had dropped us in front of our parents' front door in Ankara. This seems to be a classic story told to children all around the world. At other times I was even told that I was born in flight. Was I born on a plane traveling somewhere in Europe? Or perhaps while going to Turkey? How unusual it was to be treated as if I was a member of the alleged Armenian dogs there, and forced into feeling embarrassed all the time for belonging to that race throughout my childhood, during my forced stay in that country, which in reality was no home to me. Another enigma was that my father preferred me to be registered as being born somewhere in Turkey, because they once had properties there. I often asked, but got no true answers from anybody. I believe he was dreaming about something impossible to regain. It did not make any sense because, in the first place, I was the unwanted child, as far as he was concerned. Probably his friends or other relatives convinced him that he could benefit from this and should think twice before getting rid of me. This enigma has remained in my mind up until now, whenever I think about their heated debates during so-called family gatherings. But many things were still completely hidden from us. For example, they always avoided talking about our grandparents' unusual tattoos. On their wrists and arms were numbers, and a star, which we were to learn symbolized the Star of David. That word and the emblem were most certainly Jewish, and also Grant's words such as, "My sweet love, there was too much suffering, and it is better we do not speak anything more of it for now," were quite a concern. Obviously, her and the other elderly relatives' pasts were painful memories. Possibly they had escaped from it all and ended up in Istanbul seeking refuge. What was the actual reality? Were their origins in other parts of the Middle East? However, it still did not explain the mystery surrounding my birth. It came closer to my parental origins, which they preferred not to dwell on. I remembered so many stories being told to us that a large number of Jews came from the European continent, particularly Spain and Russia, to dwell in Istanbul. The research I conducted into my ancestral origins did not provide absolute answers, but only fragments, as most of the documentation had been destroyed throughout the decades. Yet what I have been able to discover, like an enigma, still provided me with a few clues to follow. Was this the same with my grandparents? My subsequent research revealed so little that I could not even begin to make any sense of it. The only reasonably substantial discovery about some of my distant relatives and both sets of my grandparents was their close links with India, the city of Gujarat, and also that of Jerusalem. My mother used to talk very happily about her father, and even her grandfather being very generous and helpful individuals to others, owning oil fields somewhere beyond Baghdad. Was she joking? She told me how similar I looked to my grandfather, whom I had never met. He either died of natural causes or was killed. I had no idea about their history, even after making several inquiries about them. Although my mother told me very little, my research took me back to France, to Provence. grandfather was apparently extreme with his hygiene, just like me. Everything about my Earthian background has become like a jigsaw puzzle. My understanding was that the majority of their important papers had disappeared or were deliberately destroyed to avoid further persecution. This made me feel like someone dumped in the middle of a desert. I kept asking about who, where, and when I was, to no avail. I felt like a young man without a background. My father used to repeatedly recite his own mother's words, saying, "If there was a God, why did he abandon what was his?" He became an atheist and never spoke much about anything. But in reality, and without any prejudice, I feel like repeating my words. He was never a good father. This is really a very hard statement to make. However, when he was asked to register his first son, according to a perceived tradition, he apparently wanted only to do so in Istanbul, and chose a suburb therein, Taksim, Beyoğlu, Işıklar Sokak, although knowing in absolute certainty that I was not born anywhere near there. We have been unreliably informed that he was either stationed there or lived in that part of the country, working on behalf of some authority which we were never to discover about. The reasons for this I can only guess, but cannot be absolutely certain about. It was either a safe refuge to start everything anew, without a definite background, or simply wanting to forget and leave an unfortunate past behind. This could primarily enable his own self to become wealthy after reclaiming what he dreamt of. With his Indo-European origins, we were told that he was just like his grandparents, having a military background and a highly responsible post. Let us remember that the Armenian language is known as being Indo-European, and not all Armenians are of an Orthodox background. There are those who practice the Jewish traditions. One of our other relatives had already made his way to Germany, living like all other Germans and entering the ranks of the Reich, serving his Führer in a commanding post. I am unsure about the reality of this issue, as many stories we are told, and there were also those others who have never been enlightened about. If true, his story can be found by whoever intently studies Germany's colorful history. Since it was requested by my now deceased mother and other relatives, I shall not include further information. However, I am still none the wiser about my father's real background. Concerning my mother, we have been informed that her distant past was related to some nobility. Some of her distant relatives also lived in Greece and were somewhat connected with the throne of a great European nation. My grandmother made mention of this several times to both my brother and me. Whenever there was any inquiry about it, there followed a strict criticism about her probably having lost all sense of reality. Therefore, we should simply ignore it, or there was a total silence on their part. Nothing more spoken about it. There were times when our mother advised us never to make any mention of this, as it was so desired by the decree of an important authority. Who or what that authority was, we never questioned. We have never been told anything about what the national identity of that office was. How much of it was real, I have not been enlightened. No matter what research was conducted on my part, it all ended as if I was hitting my head against brick walls. If the whole story had no significance, why was there any mention of it in the first place? Other relatives painting my grandmother's mental state was puzzling, as she lived in isolation with her bachelor son. She never made a sound, and nobody knew if she existed at all. But my mother's noble and extremely dignified personality and etiquette spoke volumes. She was highly respected by everybody, and the girls she employed. They learned many things from her. She taught them not only the art of dressmaking and exquisite designs, but also proper etiquette. Those my mother employed also used to do occasional home duties and cooking. Admittedly, their cooking was better than my mother's at times, but I chose not to speak of it out of respect to her. However, certain aspects of my mother were puzzling. For example, although reasonably well-educated, she would still take the advice of a few old people about a quick-fix treatment for health issues with us boys. I cannot forget how she obtained my brother's urine on their advice and mixed it with an amount of apricot compote, offering it to me to eat to cure my jaundice. But when she finally took me to the doctors, explaining the wise advice of one of her old friends to feed me with my brother's urine, the doctor was utterly shocked, advising her to cease her unforgivable treatment of the boy while drawing her attention to my jaundiced looks, the yellow coloring visible all over my body, including my eyes. I remember how worried my mother was, but with the proper treatment and medications, I was soon well again. The doctor then advised her that the child would not be able to give blood to anybody when he was grown up. I'm still amazed about this naive attitude of my mother. Certainly, another lesson was learned. My mother had a hobby, looking into coffee cups for what some people would classify as psychic reading. Yet she did not take it seriously. It was, after all, one of the traditional pastimes many other locals were engaged in. When she read those cups, she was extremely accurate. Some of her friends jokingly called her a good witch, and sometimes even a white witch. I cannot say whether it was due to her being highly intelligent or due to her appearance. But she was not a real witch, contrary to personal judgments of a few people I thought were my friends, but who proved themselves otherwise, speaking completely against her due to their superstitious beliefs. We will talk about them soon on as-is basis, for they stole a major portion of my youth. Going back, I remember asking my mother over and over again why she had to marry this man I did not desire to call Dad. It hurts me to say that he was a man who behaved like a criminal, even a murderer, with all his tendencies. I will repeat myself once again, for I often asked her why she needed to suffer and be beaten up most of the time, for it did not make any sense. Why, Mom? Why not leave him today? I knew she was extremely frightened of him, and yet her answer to my question was often hesitant, saying that she did not want us to grow up without a father. Deep inside, she suffered in silence for a very long time. However, we boys were growing up without a father anyway. Quite frankly, we were growing up in utter fear and sadness. My brother and I often asked each other, was he perhaps going to kill us sometime soon? In fact, he often threatened to do so. I believe that my mother took that simply as a form of speech, but did not believe he actually would. We could not trust our father under any circumstances. At one stage, just out of the blue, he had a pair of my mother's sharpest dressmaking scissors in his hands, she telling us to run and go to the police, while the mad idiot, swinging the scissors at her, started to chase us, shouting he was going to kill his young sons the dirt of the earth. We ran through the deserted streets in the early hours of the morning, absolutely frightened, but fast. We were faster than him. Eventually, out of breath, he must have collapsed or was arrested. We had no idea. Then we went to my aunt's place, and she, leaving us there, went to see our mother, along with her 2 sons. Our father was with his ever-faithful lady friend, Fatma, at that time, and did not return home for several days. My brother and I wished he would never come home, and we were crying our eyes out. Alas, he returned, and, hissing as per his habit when angry, did not utter a word for days. This trend was always evident and became more frequent from then on. Our cousins somehow made him calm down by offering him strong hallucinogens, ouzo, and playing card games in the local coffee shop and pub. Only then would he calm down for a short while, until the next episode of uncontrolled anger. We were, in fact, putting up with his psychological traumas. I believe he suffered a form of narcissism or some other form of trauma from his war years experiences. My mother used to stay up in case he would violently attack us during the night,